Failing upwards. This is the phrase that's been commonly used in reference to Buggy's character arc. To a degree, I agree. However, I think he's a faker, a fraud. He's a deception, a swindler, a cheater, a trickster, and a clown. I think he is more of a sufferer of imposter syndrome. What is imposter syndrome? It's when you have the ability to accomplish something, but you doubt your ability and feel like you can't possibly do it. This is, I believe, the encapsulation of Buggy the Star Clown. With the exception of Shanks, Buggy's the first major pirate we're introduced to firsthand. Alvida did come before Buggy, but her measly bounty of 5 million berries was even less than the bandit Higuma on Luffy's home island. So, how have I settled at this assumption? Well, let's consider the opponents Luffy's had up to Logtown. Alvida, Buggy, Captain Kudo, Captain Krieg, and Arlong. In terms of weapon endurance, Buggy is, I would describe, the opposite of Luffy. Luffy can take blows from things like maces, hammers, bullets, fists. Buggy can do the exact same thing with anything that cuts. However, let's look at the final three of East Blue. Kuro was a knife man. He would have been utterly ineffective against Buggy. Krieg had shrapnel bombs and a spear and of course his infamous gas. I think had Krieg run across Buggy, the latter would have won. The shrapnel would have been useless, the spear explodes so that could have done some damage, but the deadly gas, Buggy can fly with his feet on the ground. So that isn't a threat either, right? Arlong is harder to figure out because he's super strong in addition to his sharp teeth. I honestly think Buggy probably could have pulled out a win. And hopefully by the end of this video you'll agree with me. Because here's the thing, I mentioned those three because Luffy himself didn't really have to struggle against them. Kudo was certainly annoying. Krieg was a distraction who only seemed to do service damage. Arlong probably did the most damage, but ultimately I don't feel like Luffy was ever pushed to the edge there. He did fall in the water, but he was rescued, and that's not part of the fight. And Buggy got struck by presumably Dragon's lightning while in Logtown and just stood up again. Of course, Luffy was fine because he's a rubber boy, but Buggy had no business standing up right after that. So with this setup out of the way, let's go back in time 30 years. Buggy's the exact same age as Shanks. The two served as pirate apprentices on Roger's ship. While we've recently been given Shanks' vague origin, we still don't really know where Buggy came from, other than he was on Roger's ship since around the age of 10. Here's the thing with Roger's crew. While most of them are question marks, the ones we do know are all hard hitters. Scopper Gabbin, Odin, Shanks, Silver's Rayleigh, and of course Goldie Roger. Even at a young age, we consistently see Shanks and Buggy both involved in fights with other pirate crews, namely Whitebeard's crew. It can only be assumed that if Shanks and Buggy were kept around for the majority of the crew's travels, their combat ability had to have merit. After all, it's been stated by Buggy himself that Shanks practically radiated with potential. It's even possibly that Buggy pursues Luffy with such laser focus because he sees the same light. Again, this only really helps the imposter syndrome theory, because at the crux of it, Buggy might be as strong as Shanks. And that's a crazy thing to say, considering how much Buggy's character is played for comic relief. And don't get me wrong, the dude is super funny in almost every scene he's in. But he very recently gave an inspirational speech to his crew about what a pirate really should be after in the grand scheme of things, and that's one half of the pie. This is proof that even the clown himself can be serious. And Oda has said in interviews that sometimes he drops a clue and hopes that it'll be a breadcrumb, later finding that the fans instantly found out the information he was trying to drip feed. At other times, he has claimed to have dropped clues that he thinks are super obvious, and even after publishing, has expressed anguish at how obvious the clue was, only to later learn that fans didn't see it at all. All that tells me is that there are innumerable clues in One Piece that we still haven't picked up on. You'd think hundreds of millions of people reading this story would catch every hint dropped, but I think we mostly see what we want to see. Anyway, let's further explore his past. One of the most infamous panels of the Roger Pirates for me was from the Strong World One Piece chapter, Chapter 0. Here, Shiki and his fleet face off against Roger's singular ship and crew. While we don't see the fight itself, we do know the outcome, that Roger's crew emerged victorious. Of course, it's not impossible for the crew to have non-combatants, as I'm sure Crocus was mostly just a doctor. However, that doesn't make sense for me for Buggy. No, I think Buggy was fully in the fray. He didn't want to be, but he was. Why do I think this? Well, let's skip forward now to Impel Down and Marineford. The moment Luffy meets him in Impel Down, they start treating each other like Buggy used to with Shanks. Harmless bickering despite the apparently serious situation. And Buggy helps him practically immediately. It's noted right before Luffy starts running wild by other prisoners in Impel Down that Buggy refuses their help to attempt an escape in a group. But the second Luffy arrives, the protege of Shanks, he immediately groups up with him. Dracule Mihawk has noted before that Luffy's obscene charisma somehow pulls people from all corners towards him, and remarks that this is perhaps the most dangerous ability of all of them. But I think Buggy has this too. Buggy, since the beginning, has been pulling more and more pirates under his wing. We even know he had giants at some point helping him out. I believe that Buggy has the same charisma that he's also accidentally weaponized. Accidentally, because I don't think he realizes that everything he does attracts people. How Croc and Mihawk decided not to just kill him and form their cross guild on his corpse is neither shown nor explainable in normal circumstances. No, Buggy's running deeper into Impel Down because there's this strange similarity between him and Luffy. After Impel Down, when they're on their way to Marineford, Buggy is shocked to learn that the Marines know he's a former member of Roger's crew. This could be a typical dummy Buggy. However, maybe he's been trying to suppress his name. Maybe this is why he was some no-name pirate in the East Blue. Following Roger's death, he certainly could have linked himself with any other former Roger's pirates, but like Shanks, seems to have immediately gone out on his own. But following the revelation of his original pirate crew, it's really interesting to hear everyone's reactions. Characters like Croc, Daz Bones, Mr. 3, and Iva all remark at his fame coupled with his weakness. Jinbei even is stunned by Buggy's past aboard the Roger Pirate's ship. I'm honing in tighter on this stuff because I believe these chapters are the most important in learning about Buggy's motives and abilities. If he's a trickster, we need to dissect his every line to figure out what's right and what's not. Buggy gets excited at the mention of Rayleigh, followed by instantly downplaying his involvement in the crew. Imposter syndrome shows its face once more. In chapters 549 and 1082, he has some brief monologues about what his future could hold. I think in these specific moments, the real Buggy is emerging. They arrive at Marineford for the climactic battle to save Ace's life. There's not much from Buggy here, so I think I'll be able to splurge on the important bits. Mihawk attacks Luffy, and Luffy uses Buggy as a shield. This is mostly played for comic relief. However, when you take Mihawk's words at face value, he's not holding back his attack on Luffy. Yet his blade slips right through Buggy harmlessly. You know when someone applies armament hockey against a Logia, they actually land blows? If Mihawk's not holding back, he's certainly using hockey. And he's definitely very fast. But he slices Buggy into 1,000 pieces in a second, and Buggy's still unharmed. If Luffy's a natural ward against lightning, that's a strength that he can admittedly only take advantage of once in a blue moon. If Buggy's truly immune to all blades no matter what, the practical benefits of that far outstrip Luffy's natural defense. So what's more believable? Is Buggy's Devil Fruit powerful enough to outshine Luffy's? Or is Buggy keeping up with the strikes? A panel after Mihawk's dazzling strikes, Buggy reforms and blatantly yells at Mihawk fearlessly. How does Mihawk dominate him later on if Buggy's immune to Mihawk's primary offensive ability? What about Croc? Croc uses a lot of cutting moves with his sand. It doesn't make any logical sense that Buggy would be their subordinate, unless he was stunted by imposter syndrome. I feel like everyone's willfully ignorant because Mihawk's cool, so he must be stronger. It's the only explanation, he's cool. Buggy's not even a little bit afraid of him at Marineford. He's only thwarted when he's hoisted by his own petard, and a Muggy Ball explodes in his face. Maybe we just don't know enough about his ability. I think it's logical to assume that if Haki infused his power, Enel would be able to hurt Luffy. But maybe I'm fundamentally misunderstanding how Haki can let someone hurt someone else. It's definitely weird to read through the Marineford arc with just Buggy in mind. It's like reading through A Song of Ice and Fire and only reading from Jon Snow's chapters. But with this odd lens, I've noticed something weird that I've never noticed before. This is a war. Throughout this packed arc, we see all the major players from all sides getting hurt. For obvious reasons, the red-haired pirates don't get injured. Oda tells us that he drops clues that we don't pick up on. So naturally, I'm looking not at what's obvious, but in the proverbial nooks and crannies of these chapters. Like the rest of the Impel Down escapees, Buggy is all torn up and bloodied as the prisoners arrive at Marineford. Everyone gets injured. Chapter 562 is the last time we see Buggy injured, as a broadcast goes out to the world of his face close up and battered. Then he's frozen solid by Aokiji, yup, and subsequently broken free by an incidental flood of lava from Sakazuki. And from that point until the end of the Marineford arc, Buggy remains completely uninjured. He's still fighting, but like Kizaru's still fighting, Buggy doesn't take any visible damage. The war reaches its climax, and he's suddenly among the least injured people. He gets directly attacked by Kizaru, and save for a few comedic panels, he gets out of it completely unscathed. What's going on here? All these characters that fans have hyped up sure have a lot of problems when it comes to injuring weak, stupid Buggy the Clown. All 3 admirals happened to attack him, and he survived all 3 attacks uninjured? But if he was injured before, why'd he suddenly become uninjured? Imposter syndrome. I used to work with someone who was incredibly capable, but had so little confidence in themselves that they actively thought that they were worse than their peers in every regard. And it took a lot of pushing to get this employee to realize that he was actually exactly as capable as we all knew he was. But the thing is, there were several points along his journey where he would either get impatient or overcome pressure, and his true colors would shine. And for a few hours one day and a couple hours the next, we'd see the employee's normal performance of like 60% suddenly maxing out at like 120%. The craziest thing about this employee overcoming their issues was that they were entirely unaware that they were periodically shining. And thus, I think this is what has exactly happened to Buggy. I think sometimes, regardless of how beaten down he gets, sometimes he responds to the call to action. In other words, I think his injuries 95% of the time are superficial as part of a visual gag by Oda. I think there have been extremely few moments where Buggy's actually injured. Shanks, in a flashback, once told Buggy that he was basically invincible in a fight because he couldn't die from stab wounds. Shortly after Roger's execution, Shanks invites Buggy to his crew. Why would Shanks invite a weakling? The most well-known thing about Shanks right now is that his crew are all very powerful. In chapter 957, Commodore Brand-New talks about how Shanks' crew is perhaps the most well-balanced, impenetrable crew of the Yonko of the time. Why would Shanks invite a cowardly, weak, conniving Buggy to what would eventually be a crew of superstars? That just doesn't make sense. It feels like a hint that no one picked up on, because the obvious explanation is that Shanks and Buggy are friends, and perhaps that's why the invitation was proffered. We haven't seen Buggy physically stand up for himself much. In Impel Down, he lays the smackdown on a jail guard, showing that he's definitely capable of some sort of combat prowess. And of course, in the time it takes Buggy to injure one guard, Luffy knocks out the rest completely. But again, I think Buggy is subconsciously holding back either from fear, or maybe a sense of non-confidence in himself, or basically imposter syndrome. Then again, maybe he's just a wimpy coward for comic relief.